Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit interesting. As you can tell, this is kind of a unique setup for a rifle right now. What I have here is the 7.5 inch Radical Firearms upper that I did a review on a long time ago. Now you guys haven't seen this thing much lately for very good reason. I've had really terrible accuracy results with it, and as I mentioned in the videos I've done before on it, I start getting keyholes anytime I do anything over 55 grains. A lot of people that I told that to said, well, it's just because it's a 7.5 inch barrel. Any 7.5 inch barrel will do that. Well, I decided I wanted to test that. So what I did is I reached out to Faxon Firearms and I got one of their 7.5 inch 5.56 barrels. So very similar barrel profiles. Hopefully this should be a more or less apples to apples test. Just for reference, if this thing is going to focus on it, which hopefully it will. This is one of their 1 in 8 twist 5.56 barrels. You can see the little Faxon logo down there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot 3 different weight bullets, which I'll show you when I get started on that. I have a 50 grain, 55 grain, and 62 grain bullets that I'm going to be testing between both barrels. Ideally, I'm going to do 2 5-shot groups of each and be able to take the average from both of those. I have a Vortex scope on here to give me the best accuracy potential I have, or I can get. I have a target set up at 50 yards. Hopefully, we'll be able to get some good data at that. I don't want to shoot any further because, again, with my experience with this upper so far, it'll be really hard to figure out where shots are going at that point. So hopefully we'll get some interesting data and see how much of accuracy is the length and how much of it is the manufacturer. I have a feeling, if my biases prove to be true, that the quality of manufacturing is going to play a much bigger role than the length of the barrel. But you'll follow along and you'll find out as well. Hopefully, I brought the tools with me to be able to swap out the barrel on site. Whether or not I actually get to pull that off remains to be seen, but I will do the best I can. If not, I'll have to split this up between 2 days. But enough talking. Let me grab the ammo I'm going to be shooting, and we'll talk more about that. Okay, so the first one I'm going to be shooting is this American Eagle 50 grain jacketed hollow point. Again, this is going to be the lightest one I'm shooting. The middle weight that I'm going to be shooting is Wolf Gold, which is a 55 grain full metal jacket. And then the heavier one I'm going to be shooting is the ZQI M855. Now, like I said before, in my experience with this upper, it starts keyholing anything 62 grains or more. So we'll see if that continues with this. But all that said, let's go ahead and start loading up mags and we'll shoot. Hopefully my zero should be more or less good enough at this point. But yeah, I'm anxious to find out what happens. All right, so again, first up is going to be this American Eagle 50 grain jacketed hollow point. As you can see, it's got a tiny little bullet in there. At least hopefully that'll focus on that. But let's go ahead and see what we can do at 50 yards with it. Interesting. Still not locking open. We'll see if that problem persists. Doesn't actually look terrible back here from 50 yards. So let's go ahead and try the next one. This one is the 62 grain ZQI M855 ammo. We'll see what this does at 50 yards with the Radical Firearms barrel. Still not locking open. I'm going to try a different mag to see, but I'm going to shoot another group again before I swap ammos on this one. All right, so never had issues with not locking open on that mag. Swap to a Gen 3 P mag. We'll see if that makes any difference. But we'll shoot another group with that ZQI. Okay, that locked open. Interesting. Some of those I know are not on paper. A couple of them are, but not all of them. Since I forgot to do my second group with the 50 grain, I'll go ahead and do that right now using this other mag. It definitely grouped this 50 grain significantly tighter than that 62 grain. Interesting. Okay, let's move on to the 55 grain Wolf full metal jacket. In my BCM rifles, this shoots exceptionally well, so we'll see if it carries over with this Radical Firearms barrel as well. But I have my doubts. Now it's worth noting that I'm not letting the barrel cool in between groups, so that may have some effect. We'll see. Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. Alright, I'm going to try to shoot 5 more quickly so I can go change out my GoPro housing since it's just started raining. I don't have the waterproof one on it. I have no idea. This thing is all over the place with these. I'm going to grab that paper and hopefully save my GoPro. Okay, so some results I was expecting, some I was actually kind of impressed with. However, this thing seems to be very weight dependent. So the first couple groups I shot, which were the 50 grain full metal jacketed hollow points from American Eagle, these 4 right here plus this one were in that first group. These ones over here were in the second group. That first group, minus that one, was almost an inch at 50 yards. However, as I kind of expected, the second group actually was with the 62 grain stuff. If you've ever wanted to know what the profile of a bullet looks like, you can look right there. It keyholed pretty darn significantly just at 50 yards. Now, not all of them did that. However, you can even see another one right over here. It's hard to tell you how big the groups are because they are so big I'm not even sure where some of the hits ended up. So I'll try to see what I can do. Even with the 55 grain stuff, it's pretty hard to tell. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. And the scope is not loose for any of you thinking that was the case. So I'll try to show you pictures and group sizes for these. Unfortunately, I don't have the tools to change out the barrel right now, so I'm going to do that and then come back out here soon. When I do, I will cut that footage in right now. Okay, so we're back out here. My surroundings look significantly different, but being that we are in Oregon during the winter, the weather can be rather bipolar. So I'm out here literally less than 24 hours after I shot the last barrel, but it's now snowing and yeah. Anyway, so last night I went home, swapped out the Radical Firearms barrel for the Faxon barrel. Literally everything else is the same. Same gas tube, same gas block, same muzzle device, handguard. Everything else is the same. Just in zeroing the scope, I have a lot more confidence in this barrel, but I'm going to be shooting the same exact ammo as before. The 50 grain jacketed hollow point from American Eagle, 55 grain Wolf Gold, and the ZQI M855, which is 62 grain. I'm going to be doing 5-shot groups of both. Unfortunately, because of how erratic the Radical Firearms barrel was, I'm actually going to have to go back through the footage and see what holes go to which group, because it was so all over the place with everything other than the American Eagle. I even have some sideways rounds, as you'll see. But let's see how the Faxon barrel does. Just as a quick note of the gun that I'm using, around this upper, I have a Midwest Industries mount, quick detach mount, which has been excellent for me so far, which is holding a Vortex Diamondback, which is a 4-12, which is obviously going to give me a little bit better precision, even at 50 yards. The lower is a Spikes Tactical lower with a BCM grip. Got the Magpul ambi safety. I got a Strike Industries Viper CQB stock, since this is obviously a normally a regular SBR. And then I got a Raptor charging handle just to kind of round things out, as well as a Spikes Tactical bolt to go with my Spikes Tactical lower. Obviously, you can tell it's cold outside. So this thing has a lot of things working against it as far as the barrel. Has had really no break-in period other than the 15 rounds I just shot to get this thing zeroed. My hands are obviously colder, so that might affect things. So this thing's got a lot going against it. Let's see how much that affects my ability to shoot it here at 50 yards. I'm going to load up a mag of the 50 grain American Eagle, and we'll see what this barrel can do. So I'm going to try to repeat the process from yesterday as best I can, which includes just loading 5 rounds at a time. I'm also going to be using this 20 rounder I was using yesterday, which for whatever reason wasn't locking open on an empty mag. I want to see if maybe it was just undergassed enough with the Radical barrel to where it didn't want to hold back, because it was holding back on this other mag though. So we'll see if it carries over, just for sake of trying. Let me get my sock. Locked open on an empty mag, which was interesting because the gas port, when I was taking these apart, and I'll show you pictures, the gas port on the Radical Firearms barrel was actually bigger than the one on the Faxon, although this Faxon barrel is actually slightly longer than that Radical Firearms barrel, by about a ½ inch. What I think is the reason for that is it depends on how you measure the length of the barrel. From the very back end of the barrel extension to the tip of the threads on the Radical Firearms barrel was 7½ inches, whereas if you measure from as far back as you can get on a closed bolt, i.e. you have a bolt going into part of the barrel extension, from the face of the bolt to the tip of the threads was 7½ inches. So this one's actually a ½ inch longer, but realistically, a ½ inch shouldn't do a whole lot for accuracy, but I'm already seeing some pretty impressive results. Let's shoot another group of this stuff. Not bad. Significantly better than yesterday. All right, let's move on to the Wolf Gold. Again, I'm only going to load 5 rounds at a time, even though I'm going to be shooting 10 of these. Whew. Okay. Doesn't look like it likes this stuff. Load up another 5 rounds. All those felt like good trigger presses, by the way, for what that's worth. Okay, now M855 62 grain from ZQI. I have a feeling, based off that last group, that this group might open up quite a bit. It's definitely looking like the lighter the better with these short barrels, which makes sense because obviously the heavier the bullet, typically the longer it takes to stabilize. So with this barrel, you have a 1 in 8 twist, whereas the Radical was a 1 in 9 twist. So theoretically, you're getting more stabilization with this one, potentially. But still, interesting. Interesting. Okay. 5 more. Interesting. Very interesting. All right, let's go grab that target and we'll talk about it. So like I said, this barrel didn't really have any sort of break-in time. The only shots that I did beforehand were the zeroing, just to make sure that the scope is more or less where I need it to be. And that's where I started to feel a little bit confident about how this barrel was going to perform. I was zeroing it with just some 55 grain reloads. So the first groups that I shot for the video were the 50 grain American Eagle jacketed hollow point. Now I expected this to do the best, again, because it's the lightest bullet, which means theoretically it's going to stabilize faster, which out of a short barrel is exactly what you want. And by far, that's where I got my best results. Again, these are at 50 yards, so you can extrapolate this out to longer ranges. But the first group that I got is I shot at these two, which I shot at the bottom target because when I was using the Radical Firearms barrel, my point of impact shift when I went from 55 grain to 50 grain was probably 8 to 10 inches away from my point of aim. So I decided to give myself as big of a margin as possible, but these are the two groups that I shot. So this was the first one, which as you can see is right around an inch, and I'll do the actual measurements for you guys and make a note of those. And this one over here, which is about an inch, but I got one big ragged hole there in the middle. So that was awesome. That was a huge improvement over yesterday. The Radical Firearms barrel didn't do terrible, but significant improvement here, significantly more consistent. Then I jumped into the 55 grain full metal jacket Wolf Gold, which traditionally has shot really well out of other AR-15s that I've had. However, that was not the case here. This was actually the worst ammo, which I was not expecting. And I actually shot those at the bottom of the top target, which was this one. And just so you guys know, I'm a proponent of aim small, miss small. So on these diamonds, my point of aim is right here at the bottom tip of that diamond. And you can see that on both groups, it actually stretched out pretty significantly. Again, I'll make a note of each of those sizes for you once I get home and can actually measure them accurately. But, you know, 3-4 inches over here. Not great, if I'm honest with you. I was kind of surprised. However, the biggest surprise to me was when I then transitioned into the 62 grain stuff. As you guys will have seen from the groups that I was shooting with a Radical Firearms barrel, I got some nice bullet profiles because that thing was keyholing significantly. Again, only at 50 yards, I was getting full-on profiles of that bullet. That was not the case here. It seemed to stabilize everything enough to make nice round holes. So the first group I shot was here at the center. Again, just in case there was a point of impact shift, I had some room for forgiveness. That looks like it's about 2.5-ish inches up there for the first group. And then my second group down here, once I knew that the point of aim was good, down here was probably closer to like 1.5 inches. Again, at 50 yards. Now, let me talk a little bit about 7.5-inch barrels. Conventional wisdom is going to tell you, pretty much anyone out there who has been around AR-15s for any length of time, that you probably don't want to go with a 7.5-inch barrel. Unless you absolutely don't care about ballistics at all and you just want a range toy, I would stay away from 7.5-inch barrels. The reason I say that is when you're dealing with a super light bullet like the 5.56, velocity is really where it gets its efficacy. So if you're giving up the velocity, which you're doing with a short barrel, you don't have much left. Now, I'm going to be doing a video in the near future comparing barrel lengths and velocities with a 7.5-inch. I have an 11.5-inch BCM upper. I'll have a 14.5-inch upper and a 16-inch upper. That should give us a pretty good cross-section of how much velocity you're giving up once you jump down to a 7.5-inch barrel. My personal recommendation is if you want any firearm for actual personal defense, definitely don't go under 10.5 inches, but I personally wouldn't go shorter than 11.5 inches because at that point you still have the velocity in ranges less than 150 yards where that bullet is still going to be effective that you don't necessarily get with the 5.56. And another note too, for those of you who ever want to put a suppressor on your AR, most AR-15 suppressors in 5.56 are not rated for barrel lengths shorter than 10.5 inches. So that's something to keep in mind as well. However, if you do want to go with a 7.5-inch barrel, I think I've demonstrated that Radical Firearms may not be the one you want to go with. Definitely pay the little bit of extra money and go with a Faxon barrel because your bullets are going to be a lot more consistent. They're going to be a lot more stable. And they actually accurately measure that barrel length by going from the bolt face to the end of the barrel as well. Now I'm also going to roll in pictures comparing the crowning of both barrels. As you'll see, the Faxon barrel has I think it's a 10 or 11 degree target crowning, whereas there's really no target crowning on the Radical Firearms barrel, but I'll show you those pictures so you can make that judgment for yourself. So yeah, I guess long story short, if you want to go 7.5 inches, definitely give Faxon Firearms a look. I could not be happier with their barrels. I've had them, every build that I've personally done has had a Faxon barrel in it. I've done Faxon barrel testing for the Hasios MC as well, and I was very impressed with those results at longer ranges as well. So definitely a lot to like from Faxon Firearms. I'll also link a video that the Hasios MC did for his the American Militia documentary, where he did an interview with Bob Faxon about the Second Amendment and about the role of the militia here in the United States. And I can tell you I was there when he did the interview. He had no prior warning to it, so everything that he said was straight off the top of his head, and I will say he knocked it out of the park. So when you see, you know, the face of the company, someone like Bob Faxon, who really is passionate about our rights as Americans, and willing to say the things that he said in that video again, which I'll link, makes me feel really good to spend my money there. So I'll put links to where you can find all the Faxon barrels down below. I definitely learned my lesson with buying a cheap upper with this Radical Firearms upper. You know, there's plenty of videos with issues with parts breakages and reliability on other people's channels, which I might link to below as well. I'm optimistic that maybe in the future they will improve their quality control and make high quality AR parts and barrels and uppers and complete rifles. But every one that I've personally handled has not quite been there. Again, I'm optimistic that they will improve, and in the future I might be able to recommend them. However, for now, I would stay away from it. Either build your own, go with a quality manufacturer, and if you're going to build your own, check out Faxon Firearms. Anyway, all that said, I hope you're able to get something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.